Enter. There. So I can just bring that up. And then just press E. And then we'll bring those edges down so they match up with the other objects here. And when you're making terrain and stuff like this, you definitely want to, shoot, I got Clipper selected still. So press X again to get out of Clipper tool. Yeah, when you're making terrain, you should stick with one grid base. I'll show you in a second what I mean. So yeah, we kind of have like a little hill going on now in the middle. And then we can just select our other objects. But as you can see, when I try to select it, it's selecting the ground texture instead, or the ground object. So what we have to do is we have to hide it. So you just press H to hide. And then we can select all objects. And then we can just drag those up so it's above the ground here. And then to unhide our objects, Shift and H. And then that brings it back. So as you can see, it's kind of lifted here. If we didn't want that to be shown, we can just press E for edges again, and then we can just drag that down. I guess it cannot be done. My bad. Oh. Yeah, for the different grid sizes, right now it's using 4 grid, which is default, what it starts off with. Under the grid tab up top here, you can choose a 4th grid, which makes the most detailed grid you can have, which is pretty small cubes, or it's a small grid size. That's used for like making doors and stuff, so when you're adding a lot of detail, you'd want to use that. Sticking with the 4, or the 8, I should say, is probably the best one to stick up with for making most of your stuff. You should always save your map at least like every 15 minutes, because this program does crash quite often. And you should save different file types too, so don't just save over the same one. You should save over it as a different file as well, because if that file crashes or gets corrupt, because that's happened to me before, I've worked on the map for like 4 hours and I just completely lost everything, which sucks. Yeah. So yeah, everything's made out of cubes. That's it. And you just resize it and do whatever you want. There's one thing I want to show you here. When you're making a building with like 2 different walls in it, which one here? Okay. Yeah, when you're making a building with 2 different walls, and you have a corner. You want to have it, because if you have them overlapping, it just looks terrible. I'll show you. See, when you orbit around, you can see you got these 2 objects overlapping, and it just looks really bad. Because you can see the textures flashing there. So to fix that, just select our object here. We probably want to change it to a top view, so Control Tab, and you can view in the top. Just use your mouse wheel to zoom in and out, and then right click to drag around in the grid view here. Pressing E, you can choose to adjust your edge. So I'm just going to drag this over, so it kind of clips it. So it just gives it a sharp edge at the corner, and we'll just do it to the other object as well. And so now that looks a lot better, and the textures are better too. There's no wasted texture because there's no overlapping. And there you have it. I'll be going over. Oh my goodness, I'll be going over a lot more complex stuff here later in videos. But for right now, I just want to show you how do you get around in this program. So I showed you how to texture stuff. You can also make your own textures as well. Just under the texture folder that I showed you at the very beginning, in your ET main folder, there's a folder where you made a texture folder. You can make your own custom textures and you just place them in there. And then when you go to the textures tab here, you can choose your own custom textures instead of using the ones that the game uses. And when you make a folder inside the textures folder, like I made one called Black River because that's the map I was going to use, you can just click that and it'll show all your custom textures in there. And when you don't have anything selected, it shows you all your textures that you're using right now as well. What else could I show? Oh yes, you can also adjust certain objects. Instead of moving the edges, you can also move the vertexes or the dots of an object as well. By pressing V, it makes these green dots appear, and you can just click on a dot and move it a certain way, and you can adjust it that way as well. And it'll automatically add geometry to it. So I adjusted this edge to bring it down, and then it's like, oh hey, I can't do that because there's no lines here to adjust that. So it adds an edge in the center here, so I can move that line down, or that vertex down. Probably shouldn't use the vertexes too much if you're using geometry for your terrain, because it does get pretty messy and it's harder to line stuff up that way. So you should always stick with a grid to line things up with, because it doesn't really snap well using the vertexes. So it's only good to use if it's only necessary. Also, it crashes sometimes too if you do it. So I tend to stay away from that. Yeah, that's about it. You have your plugins tab up top here. I'll just go over some of the interface here, and then I'll finish up. So under the plugins, you can import sprites, and you can have your text tool and model. I don't like using the latest version of GTK Radiant because it doesn't have a plugin that exports your models out. Because sometimes I like making objects in a different 3D editing program, and I need that plugin to export the player models so I can use that as a reference to how big my objects need to be. You also have curves, so you can make cylinders as well. You don't have to make cubes. So cylinders would be more for like corridors and like, yeah. You have your brushes. You can have different side brushes, but it's best to stick with the cubes. Miscellaneous, you can change the gamma, so you can brighten your window up. Textures tab, you have all your textures you can choose from. Grid, you have the different grid sizes to choose from. I recommend staying with grid 4 and grid 8. BSP is what you'd use to build your map with. We won't get into that till later on. Selection, not only can you like scale your object, you can also rotate an object too. I showed you have the basic rotating buttons up top here, but they only do like 90-degree rotations. Sometimes you want to do rotation that's not exactly 90 degrees. So you can select different objects here and you just press R and then you can rotate it however you want it to be. But you should only rotate once you have whatever you're building completely finished. So you'd have to have everything selected and then rotate it, because it's harder to line stuff up when it's rotated because it's not on the grid anymore. So selection, you have the rotate and flip. Invert selections as well. View, don't really need to get in that. Edit. In edit, you can make prefabs, so you can select multiple objects and then you can save selection as a prefab, which is pretty awesome, because if you have like more than one person that's working on the same map, you can have a person working on objects and then the main person building the map as one whole part. He can take all your prefabs and then he can just load them right up into his project, and it's actually pretty awesome. Like, you just go under the file tab up top and you can choose import and you can just load those prefabs right up. And you can choose new map, open, import, save as. Yeah, that's about it for this tutorial.